Hey, everybody, welcome to All In Leadership podcast. We're so glad that you decided to join us today. And we are excited to be talking to you about something that's very important. But before we get into that conversation, I just want to say this. If you would help us by subscribing, by hitting that little bell for notifications, and by liking and commenting and sharing our podcast with others, it would do us a great help, because we're trying to, get in that algorithm and connect with as many people as we possibly can, because we want to build this leadership kind of community where people are learning and developing and growing together. And if you have things that you'd like for us to discuss or talk about, please feel free to put that in the comments. And we're so glad that you've decided to join us today. God bless you. I am excited to talk to you about what we're going to talk about today, and that is the leadership trap. And what is that? That's ego. And man, is it a problem for leadership. I can tell you from experience, growing up as a young man, starting in leadership very early, I got to tell you, ego can get in the way. And I experienced it, and I've had my own battles with it, and I've had to struggle through it, and I've watched other people struggle through it. And I think sometimes we think that ego is good when it comes to leadership, because ego is the same as confidence. But what we're going to find out in this episode is that it's not the same. And so what we want to do is we want to talk about ego for what it is and how it looks on the day-to-day, and how it practically affects and impacts not only our lives, but our organization, our team, and every aspect of what we do. So we need to deal with ego, and it's important for us to do so. So ego is one of the most destructive forces in leadership, because it quietly poisons trust, feedback, ownership, and team health. I mean, think about it. Look back on those subjects, those ideas in your leadership, and when they've gone awry, when they've had problems, what was the contributing factor? Most always, it has something to do with ego. You might even call it pride. Pride can be a killer to all of us as leaders, because it paralyzes us and it paralyzes our team. A lot of leaders think that team breaks down because of a lack of strategy or the wrong strategy, maybe poor systems, or maybe a lack of talent. That's true sometimes, but many times what actually breaks a team is ego. It's not always that loud ego, though. I mean, think about it. You don't have to be loud and boisterous and gregarious in your personality to have a problem with ego. It's not always that obvious arrogance that we're talking about, but subtle ego problems, pride issues. The kind that has to be right. Have you ever been this person, or you know this person? The kind that can't be questioned, the kind that needs control, needs everything to run through them, the kind that protects image instead of building people. And if a leader does not deal with ego, I'm just going to tell you, eventually the team will pay for it. And eventually that leader will pay for it. And what's unfortunate in our system, or in a lot of leadership type settings, a lot of business and corporate settings, a lot of even ministry settings, that egotistical person can move on and get another role or find another place to be, and end up messing up a lot of other people. Because in some cases, egotistical people never face consequences. But ultimately, what they realize is the reason they've had to transition or move or go or do all these things comes back down to that ego. I've had lots of friends that have struggled with this. I've struggled with it myself as a young man. And it really is a killer. You don't usually lose your team because of strategy or systems or things like that first. You lose it because of ego. Because let's talk about what ego affects. If your ego is carried away, if you're walking around in pride, how you listen is affected. How you respond to people is affected by your ego. How you handle disagreement, how you share credit, how safe people feel around you. A team can survive imperfect strategy. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced that. If you're a leader, I know I have. We've had imperfect strategy before, but we still made it through. We still accomplished what we were trying to accomplish. We learned from it. We changed it. A team can survive trial and error. A team can survive learning curves even. But what teams struggle with and what they struggle to survive from is a leader who makes everything about themselves. And unfortunately, that's almost been the popular way of doing things. Everything's about the personality of the leader. The organization is built around their personality. It's got to be about them. And there are some confusing things in there because culture is modeled. It's not just taught. You have to model it. Well, here's the problem. If a leader has an ego problem, then your culture begins to have an ego problem, and everyone is affected by it. This is where culture starts to erode. So let's talk about what ego actually is. Ego is not the same thing as confidence. Healthy confidence is grounded, but ego is really fragile. Think about it. Healthy confidence is grounded in that knowing who you are. Because confidence says, I know who I am. But ego says, I need you to validate who I am. Now think about the difference there. Stop and think for a minute. Think about the times that's been you. Not that you walked into a situation where you were confident, you knew who you were, you knew what you're trying to achieve, you know you're the whole of who you are, and you operate from that. Or the times that you've walked into a situation needing others to validate you. You can tell the difference. You know the difference. You've seen the difference. And sometimes you've worked for people, leaders who struggled with this difference. Confidence can receive feedback. Ego resists feedback. Confidence develops others. Ego competes with others. Ego is insecurity trying to protect itself. That's all it is. It's insecurity trying to protect itself. That's why ego often shows up in subtle rather than dramatic forms. When you see somebody being egotistical, what we would call egomaniacal, it's not hard to resist that. Like if you're following a leader who's just arrogant and bold about it and constantly self-centered and just personality's big and all that, it's not hard to go, yeah, I'm out. But it's the subtle problems with the ego, the subtle prides, the insecurities that are not loud and big that can destroy a team if we allow them to live in us or we don't confront them in other leaders around us. So let's talk about what ego looks like in leadership. It looks like control, manipulation, defensive,ness, needing to be right. I mean, if you always have to be right no matter what, you can never be questioned. It's always about you being right and others being wrong. You have an ego problem. Someone who always interrupts others, ego problem. Someone who's explaining too much, that's an ego problem. Reacting when challenged instead of responding, taking disagreement, every disagreement, any disagreement personally. This is all ego. Because ego makes leadership about you. Instead of asking what's best for the mission, you start asking, how do I look in this moment? And that shift is dangerous. It's dangerous for you as a person. It's dangerous for the people who are serving with you. It's dangerous for your organization. I mean, this stuff really has a price. It has a cost. And the interesting thing about it is the cost is big, not just to the team, not just to the organization, but to you as a leader, because ultimately it'll get you. Ultimately, it will set you back. Ultimately, it'll make it where people don't want to work with you, don't want to serve with you. The consequences to ego and leadership are heavy. So some practical examples, think about this. A leader asks for feedback, but when feedback comes, they explain it away, or they justify their behavior, or they punish the person emotionally who brought the feedback. I've seen this a million times. I try not to be guilty of that because I'm a person who believes that you can grow through feedback. You need people who see you and walk with you and talk with you and work with you to give you feedback, not just about what's going on in the organization, but about your leadership, because that helps you to grow and develop as a leader. It helps you to see yourself through the eyes of people who serve alongside you, who serve above you, who serve around you, who serve for you or with you. It's important for you to have that perspective. That leader may say they want honesty, but the team learns very quickly that honesty can get them in trouble if they really tell the truth. That's ego at work. And a lot of times I think we fall into that, because the truth is, we know in leadership and in training and development and growth that, man, we need to hear feedback. We need to know what's going on. We need to get better. And so because we hear that that's what we need to do, we say things like that. But if we have ego that we're dealing with, if we have insecurities that we're dealing with, then what happens is we get defensive when we do get that feedback we've asked for. Or we say, be honest with me, but when someone's honest, you get mad with them, or you pout, or you isolate them. It's just toxic. It's ego, it's pride, and it's ugly, and most importantly, it messes you up. So once ego gets into leadership, it never stays personal. It always becomes cultural. You can't keep it from seeping into the culture of your organization. So let's talk about the cost of ego in leadership. Ego always costs more than the leader realizes that it costs. The reason is simple. Ego changes the atmosphere of the team. Remember, we've talked about before that we can't control outcomes, but we can control inputs. We can't control results, but we can control atmospheres. In other words, I can't control the harvest and how well it does, but I can control planting the seed, and I can control the cultivation of the soil. I can create the right environment. Well, when ego gets involved, it messes with the atmosphere. It messes with the environment. And so that seeps into the culture and costs you a lot. People begin adapting to the insecurity of the leader. Instead of bringing their best, they bring their caution. Instead of speaking openly, they manage the room. Instead of solving problems, they protect themselves. Man, these are all really negative things if you want a collaborative team and you want an organization that's growing and developing and improving. Ego-driven leaders tend to shut down feedback. Even if they've asked for it, they'll shut it down. They create fear in teams. They overcorrect small issues. They make small things. I always teach, turn mountains into molehills. Don't turn molehills into mountains. Undermine trust. Leaders who are egotistical, they need control over every outcome. They also need credit for every outcome if it's a good outcome. They keep weak people around them because strong people make them feel threatened. If you don't staff yourself with people who are strong and capable leaders, and you run those people off because they threaten you and because you don't like their opinions, or you don't like them doing well, because you see it as some kind of competition to you, man, that's an ego problem. You want great, strong, developed, growing people who are strong in the areas that you might be weak on your team, so that they'll be way better than you are, because it only impacts and makes the team better, impacts and makes the organization better, and it makes you better. Leaders with ego issues often don't build strong teams. They build safe teams. There's a big difference. Safe for them, but not safe for the organization. They surround themselves with people who won't challenge them or question them or outshine them. Man, I know that this sounds ridiculous. I know when I'm sitting here thinking about this and I'm reading my notes here and I think, this sounds ridiculous. Like, who really does this? But you and I both know we've been guilty of it at different times, different places and seasons of insecurity in our lives. And we also know we've worked with people who struggled with this, because people are imperfect. They're human. But the truth is, if we're going to be effective and successful and build a team and organization that's going to grow, we got to get rid of the ego. The ego has to go. It may protect the leader's image to think like that, to act like that, to behave like that, but it weakens the whole organization. And the ultimate thought is, what's better, that you have a great image or that your organization actually succeeds? And then that becomes your real image, not your pretend image. And here's what happens as a result of that. Low innovation. People don't want to innovate. They don't want to be creative because they're afraid they're going to be criticized. They're going to be penalized. They're going to be put down. They're going to be treated as if they're subordinate. They're not good enough. All these things because you can't handle their creativity or their strength or their talent. It creates high tension. It creates quiet dysfunction. That kind of dysfunction that's you can feel the tension in the organization, but you can't actually put your finger on it. That passive communication where people don't say what they need to say. They're not clear. Everything's muddy. It creates a lack of ownership. It creates a declining of trust. It creates an artificial harmony. In other words, everybody's pretending to be together, but they're not really together. Quiet dysfunction is one of the worst kinds of dysfunction because outwardly everything can look fine. This is why you can see an organization or a leader or individuals who everything looks good and something happens, like the bottom falls out and they topple over and it's a bad situation. And everyone goes, of all people, I can't believe they would have this problem. And it's because of ego, that quiet, not boisterous, loud, arrogant ego, but that pride that has infiltrated their soul and their mind and has caused them to be self-centered and has created this very fragile organization and team that looks great, but is not great. And then all of a sudden, somebody pulls the wrong string. It's the straw that broke the camel's back and everything falls apart. They no longer feel safe. They no longer feel valued or heard. And that kind of culture slowly erodes a team. Ego does not just wound relationships. It lowers performance. What humble leaders do is different. Humble leaders are not weak leaders. Sometimes I think when people think of humble leaders, they think they're being weak. And I'm not saying be passive. Humble leaders aren't passive leaders. They're strong leaders. They're proactive leaders. They're intentional leaders, but they're not egotistical leaders. Humility is not insecurity. They're strong enough as a leader. This is a great way to describe a humble leader, that they're strong enough to not make leadership about them. They're strong enough to make their leadership about the organization, about the vision, about the people who are bringing that vision to pass. And that's what humility looks like. I love how C.S. Lewis defines humility. He says, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. And that's the truth. Humility is not insecurity. It's not passivity. Humility is not pretending that you don't have strengths. That's false humility. Humility is, there's a description that the Bible gives that I think is very good. It says that humility, it also describes it as meekness. And meekness is not weakness. Meekness is, I think when we think of meek, we think of a little weak, person who doesn't have any strength and isn't bold. That's not meekness at all. The true definition of meekness is restrained authority or restrained power. It's strength under control. And that's what true humility is. It's leadership that is secure enough to serve the mission, to serve the team, and to serve the truth. Humble leaders are guilty of a lot of things. They're guilty of asking questions. They admit mistakes. They give credit away. I love I can tell you, when you see a humble leader, here's what you see. You see somebody who, when something good happens, they give credit to their team, and then they take responsibility for anything when things go wrong. That's a true humble leader. They receive feedback without collapsing under the weight of it. They develop people around them. They stay teachable always, no matter what level of leadership they have arrived at, no matter how much achievement they've had, no matter how good things are, they are always teachable. And they think they can learn from anybody and any situation. They value truth over their own image. And we live in such a weird time where everything's about image. And the thing is, when you make everything about image, then it becomes very shallow and it becomes very insignificant because image is just surface. It's not what's substance. It's not real. It's not deep. It's not character. It's just image. And image is just the outward expression or outward look of the person you really are. And if you're pretending that image, then you're not even drawing from the substance of your own character. It's crazy. And humility doesn't live in the land of image. Humility lives in the land of truth. We need to really think about that as leaders. And we need to really get that. We need to get that down in our soul and in our mind. That humility lives in the land of truth, not in the land of pretension. So let's look at some practical breakdowns about this. What do humble leaders do? They ask questions. So instead of assuming they already know, they're always curious. Good leaders are curious. They never assume, I know everything there is to know about this. You know why? Because good leaders make good decisions, and good decisions are made based on all the information and the right information. And so if I'm going to get the right information and all the information, then I'm going to be curious. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to try to find out. I'm not going to assume I already know. Matter of fact, I understand as a leader, as a secure and humble leader, I understand there's a lot of things I don't know. And I do not want to be caught acting like I know something and not really knowing it. To me, in my mind, that's the definition of stupidity. I see people doing this all the time. They work with a new team, and instead of just asking questions and say, hey, I don't really understand that, or I don't really know how to do that, or they think I can't let them see that I don't know, so I'm going to act like I do know. And then you act like you do know, you still don't know, and you get it wrong, and everybody knows you don't know. So the very thing you were trying not to do, you do because your pride won't let you just admit, I don't know, and I need help. Can you help me? Can you teach me? Let me ask you some questions about this. That's what a true humble leader does. That's what a true humble, growing, mature person does, right? So instead of assuming they already know, they stay curious. And this creates learning. It creates collaboration. It creates buy-in because people want to collaborate. They want to be a part. They want to participate. But if they feel like the leader is got to make it about themselves, if they feel like the leader is threatened by your participation, then they shut down and they won't help and they won't bring their best. Let's talk about that second practical thing. They admit mistakes. Nothing builds trust like owning your mistake. I've done this before. I won't go into the details or tell you the story, or stories, I should say. But there's been many times I've gotten it wrong. Many times we've tried things that didn't work. Many times that we said, this is going to be it, man. This is going to work. It's going to be awesome. And it didn't work. And instead of making excuses, instead of explaining it away, instead of just denying it and acting like it didn't happen, I owned it. And I can tell you, in those moments of leadership, in those moments of character testing, is when I've gained the most trust as a leader. When I've said, look, I got it wrong. It was my fault. We didn't handle that. It wasn't right. Let me tell you where I learned that. I learned that from my dad. I was a little kid, and I was with a friend, and it was summer vacation, and we went into a store, and we were about to go swimming. And back then, this was in the store where they had stickers. They put stickers that this is the price of it. Didn't have barcodes or anything like that. And so I wanted these certain goggles, this mask that I wanted to wear because we could dive down in the water. And you know all about that. And so I wanted that, but the one I really wanted cost more than I had, money that I had. And my friend said to me, he said, hey, listen, why don't you just switch the stickers? And when you go up front, they won't know the difference. You can just switch the stickers and then you'll be fine. You'll get to pay the amount of money you've got. And I said, that's a great idea. Now, in my heart of hearts, I knew that this wasn't right. I knew that my dad would not be pleased. I knew that it could get me in a lot of trouble, but I really wanted those. And so I did it. I did it, man. And we went up and we bought them. Nobody knew the difference. I left. I enjoyed that summer and I enjoyed those goggles. And I thought, this is great. When you want something, you can just make it happen. But then after a time, I started thinking about what I'd done. And, I'm just that guy. I can't keep it to myself. My conscience won't allow me to do that. So I couldn't take it anymore. And I told my dad. I said, Dad, I was crying. I said, Dad, I got to tell you something I did. I really feel bad. And my dad appreciated me for telling him. But then he said, here's what we're going to do. This was in a different town. It was like several hours away from us. And this was back when the way you communicated was writing letters. And he said, here's what we're going to do. You're going to write a letter to that store. And you're going to tell them that you did this, and you're going to give them the money. And you're going to own it 100%. You're going to let them know you're sorry, that here's the money to pay for this. So he taught me to take ownership, and he taught me to make amends for it. He taught me to rectify it. And so, when I got older, that really played a part in my leadership, and it still plays a part of my leadership today. Guys, listen, if you want people to trust you, just own your faults. When you get it wrong, you get it wrong. Listen, it's not a horrible thing. People can trust you if you'll just admit it. Leaders who can say, I missed that, they gain trust from people. I handled that poorly. They gain trust from people. The third thing, they give credit. Man, leaders give credit. Humble leaders give credit. Insecure leaders absorb praise. Secure leaders distribute it. They know the goal is not to be the hero, but the goal is to build the team. So don't be that insecure leader that has to absorb all the praise. Give the praise out to your team. They made it happen. The fourth thing was they receive feedback. And boy, this really tells the story about whether you're insecure or not. This tells the story about whether you are humble or you're prideful. This is it right here. Can you receive feedback? A humble leader does not treat correction like rejection. Think about that. They understand that feedback is not always a personal attack on them. Sometimes it's a gift. Matter of fact, good, humble leaders will set up a system of continual feedback. We call it a feedback loop that helps them to know how they're doing and how the organization's doing. And they don't take it personally. They expect it. They want it because they know it brings continual improvement. The fifth thing was they develop others. Man, this is key to secure, humble leadership. Ego hoards influence. In other words, I can't give influence. I can't release people. I can't empower. I've got to control everything because I need the credit. I want the credit. I want it to be about me. But humility multiplies influence. Ownership says this, I need to get it right. I don't need it to look right. I need it to be right. I don't need to couch this in a certain way or position this or posture this in a certain way so it looks good. I need it to be good. So an owner, a leader that owns it says, I need to get it right, not just I need to look right. And that's a massive shift because one protects image, the other pursues truth. One is self-centered, the other is mission-centered. One reacts, the other is responding. Here's what ego sounds like. That's not what I meant. Or you misunderstood me. Or let me explain why I did that. Or that's not fair. Or people just don't get the pressure that I'm under. Here's what ownership sounds like. I can see how that landed wrong. I need to own my part in this. That's on me. Help me understand what you're seeing. What needs to change moving forward? That is ownership. And ownership is where growth happens. You cannot improve. Listen to this. Listen to me very carefully. You cannot improve what you refuse to own. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm so glad that you're a part of our leadership community. And I hope that this has been helpful to you. And if it has, please share it with someone else. God bless you and lead well today.